Hello, welcome all. Welcome in another important video. I hope you all are doing great. So in this video, we will see what are events in Lambda. Okay. So first of all, before we jump into concept, let me paint picture for you. So imagine you are creating one e-commerce website and this is your front end. Okay. This is, let's say you are creating Alibaba.com. Okay, and this e-commerce website will obviously have one search box and user will come and search products in this search box. So whenever user will try to search, you will have to make query to the database, and your database is sitting here. Let's imagine, okay, your entire product details, your sales details, your orders is saved in this database. Now if someone search in this search box, you will have to fetch this data from database. Okay, so ideally we create APIs for that, and we deploy APIs using one backend technology. Let's say we have developed APIs using Node.js plus Express.js, and we deploy that on server. So let's say this is our EC2 instance. Okay, we have deployed our APIs here, and this after deployment we got one URL, let's say HTTPS, which we can use to fetch, which we can use to trigger that API, and that API will go to the database, fetch data from the database, and it will return it back to our front end. In nowadays also kind of it works in similar fashion, but the only thing that is changed is the middle part. Instead of creating our APIs and deploying it on EC2 instance, now we are using Lambda function. Now the job of this Lambda function is to go into database, fetch required data, and return it back. But now since we cannot directly call this Lambda function from our front end, there is no direct feature which we can use to call this Lambda function. We will have to think about this solution. There's one part of puzzle missing here. Okay, so how we can trigger this function, that is missing, because until now we were using simple serverless invoke command to invoke our function. But when you are in production and you are working with front end, obviously you will not be able to trigger this Lambda function with this command. Okay, so in that case we have to use events. So events in a Lambda is nothing but trigger points. So there are multiple trigger points. There are multiple ways through which we can invoke this Lambda function, and these triggers are event driven. So whenever we want to invoke this Lambda function, we can define trigger. This is called trigger. Okay, and if we go to our AWS console, we will see there is an option to add trigger. Okay, so you can click on this, and inside this list you will get multiple options. Let's say you want to create API gateway, so that means it will enable one HTTP URL. It will enable this HTTP URL which you can call from the front end, and this HTTP URL will trigger this Lambda function, and then Lambda function will go to database, fetch data, it will return it back to HTTP, and HTTP will ultimately return required data to the front end. There are multiple ways you can search it here. You can create events for in CloudFront, okay, VPC little with AWS IoT. Then there is a S3 bucket. Okay, so whenever you will add new items inside the S3 bucket, you can trigger that. Whenever you will delete anything from the S3 bucket, you can trigger your Lambda function. So basically, all in all, we can say events is nothing but trigger points which invoke Lambda function. Okay, so if you go over the documentation, let me show you. Just search for serverless config event. You will find this link. Go over this, and here you will find multiple ways which we can configure to invoke Lambda function. Okay, you will see pretty much same options which we just saw here in this list. Okay, you can click on any link and try to integrate that with our project. Okay, so we will definitely try to create at least 2 events, so we will get to know that how this how this events works in serverless.